It is 8:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, April 17, 1970. In living rooms across America and across the world, millions are holding their breath. They have been holding it for 3 long days. They've watched a drama unfold 200,000 miles away in the cold void, a story of human ingenuity against impossible odds. They've listened to the calm, professional voices from Mission Control, clinging to the hope they projected. But hope is a finite resource, and for the astronauts of Apollo 13, it has just run out. The world was ready for a miracle. They got silence. This is not the story of that miracle. This is the story of what followed. This is the story of the silence. This is the story of the world we lost when we lost Apollo 13. We all know the story of their struggle. The explosion in the service module. The line, "Houston, we've had a problem." The desperate fight for power, for water, for air, using the lunar module as a lifeboat. The world watched, united in anxiety. The successful return of Apollo 13 is remembered as NASA's finest hour. But what if it wasn't? What if that final, crucial engine burned to bring them home? Failed. What if the final transmission from Jim Lovell was not a sigh of relief, but a final, static-laced farewell? Our timeline, our future, hinged on that single, precise maneuver. Let's rewind the tape to the moment the fork in the road appeared, and take the other path. Inside the command module Odyssey, the cold is biting. It's 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Condensation covers the walls. The 3 men are dehydrated, exhausted. Fred Haise is fighting a fever, but they are alive. They have endured the nightmare. Now just 15 minutes from re-entry, there is a fragile, desperate hope. They have done everything right. The world is waiting. The SPS engine needed to ignite for a precise 4 minutes and 23 seconds. It needed to slow them down just enough to be captured by Earth's gravity, to dip into the atmosphere at the perfect angle. Too shallow, and they'd skip off into space forever. Too steep, and they'd burn up. In our timeline, it worked. In this one, it stutters. A low, guttural rumble echoes through the spacecraft, not the clean ignition they expected. The lights on the console flicker violently. An alarm begins to blare, a sound they haven't heard before. "Houston, we have an anomaly. SPS pressure is dropping. We are off nominal." The crew's hands move frantically over the controls. Lovell's face is a mask of concentration, then dawning horror. The trajectory plot on a screen in Houston begins to deviate from the green safe line into a red arc that points directly into the heart of the atmospheric fire. The burn is unstable. They are losing thrust. They are coming in too steep, too fast. The calculations at Mission Control are frantic, but they are seconds too late. The margin for error in spaceflight is 0, and they have just crossed it. The plasma of re-entry envelops the capsule. It is a controlled fire, a shield that is supposed to save them. But now, at this velocity, it is a furnace. The heat shield, designed for a specific profile, is being overwhelmed. The roar of atmospheric friction builds to a deafening level. Inside the cabin, the noise is terrifying. The spacecraft shakes violently. A family photo velcroed to the wall catches fire and is instantly incinerated. "Odyssey, Houston. Do you read? Odyssey. Your trajectory is Odyssey." The communication screen on the console in Mission Control. The data stream from Odyssey is a chaotic mess of numbers, then flatlines. The audio from the spacecraft dissolves into a scream of static, then cuts to absolute silence. It is 8:52 p.m. The world is still holding its breath, and in that silence, something in the human spirit breaks. The grief was national, but it was also deeply, terrifyingly personal. This wasn't a launchpad fire, a quick, brutal tragedy over in seconds. This was a 3-day-long public execution. The world had gotten to know these men, had rooted for them, had followed their every breath. Their deaths felt like losing family. President Nixon addressed the nation, pale and drained. The famous speech he had prepared in case they died on the moon was repurposed, but the words fell flat, unable to capture the unique horror of this public loss. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come, we'll know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. But the words rang hollow. The moon wasn't their grave. The void was. They had been so close. The cruelty of that almost was a poison. The investigation was swift and brutal. NASA, the shining symbol of American can-do spirit, was laid bare. The technical fault was traced to a flawed valve in the SPS system, a tiny, insignificant-looking piece of metal that had passed all its inspections. The conclusion was inescapable. It was not a grand, heroic failure. It was a stupid, simple, mechanical mistake. The political will for Apollo evaporated overnight. The public, once enthralled, was now traumatized. The question on every politician's lips was no longer, when do we go to Mars? But, at what cost? Apollo 14 was officially canceled 1 month after the disaster. 15, 16, and 17 would soon follow. The hardware, the pinnacle of human engineering, was mothballed or turned into museum exhibits. The moon, once a destination, became a memorial, a place too painful to visit. We broke the dream. After 13, it was like someone turned off the lights. The can-do spirit was just gone. We went from calculating trajectories to Mars to designing better seatbelts for the space shuttle, a project that was now under a microscope it would never escape. The space shuttle program, already in development, was immediately scaled back. Its design, once ambitious, was stripped of any risk. It became a truck, a utilitarian vehicle for low Earth orbit. No grand space stations, no interplanetary missions. The goal was safety, above all else. The motto was, "No more heroes." In the Kremlin, there was no celebration. American failure was a strategic opportunity, but the global mood of despair was a political problem. The Soviets, ever pragmatic, saw a chance to seize the moral and technological high ground. They paused their own lunar program, realizing a direct, post-tragedy success would be seen as ghoulish. Instead, they pivoted. Their new narrative was one of peaceful, steady, collective progress. "We do not race for glory," they proclaimed. "We build for humanity." By the mid-1970s, they had a permanent space station, a peace orbiter in space. They focused on long-duration missions, on space manufacturing, on the slow, deliberate conquest of near-Earth space. The moon became their logical next step, not a flag-planting exercise, but a resource. The space race didn't end with an American victory. It was ceded to the Soviets, who now framed themselves as the stable, responsible stewards of humanity's future in space. Back on Earth, the cultural impact was profound and dark. The optimistic, clean-cut sci-fi of the 1960s died with the Apollo 13 crew. Gone were the stories of brave explorers and gleaming starships. In their place, a new, gritty genre was born. Cinema and literature became obsessed with dystopia, with technological failure, with the inherent darkness of the void. The final scene of a spaceship being swallowed by the silent, indifferent blackness became a recurring nightmare. We had looked into the cosmos and seen not a new frontier, but a tomb. The right stuff was no longer a badge of honor. It was seen as a death wish. A generation of kids who wanted to be astronauts now looked elsewhere. The dream was over. The 1980s arrived, not with a renewed push into space, but with a retreat inward. The American space program was a shell, focused on launching commercial and military satellites with its expensive, overly cautious shuttle. There was no talk of a moon base. Mars was a fantasy. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was achieving milestone after milestone. They landed cosmonauts on the moon in 1982, not for a day, but for a month. They established a small rotating outpost at Lagrange Point 1, a stepping stone between worlds. The world watched the red flag planted in the lunar soil, and it was a symbol not of communism, but of simple, stark progress. The future was being written and America was not in the story. This technological stagnation had a cascading effect. Without the intense, focused pressure of the Apollo program, the drive for miniaturization in computing slowed. The integrated circuit advanced, but not at the breakneck pace we knew. Personal computers arrived later, were clunkier and less powerful. The internet, A project with roots in DARPA remained a niche, military academic network for years longer. The smartphone, a piece of science fiction. Our world of instant global communication and information in our pockets was delayed by a decade, perhaps two. The loss of Apollo 13 didn't just kill 3 men and a program. It put the brakes on the very engine of technological innovation. By the turn of the millennium, the landscape of power was irrevocably altered. The Soviet Union, bolstered by its uncontested space dominance and the technological spin-offs that came with it, did not collapse. Its economy, while still strained, was propped up by a monopoly on space-based manufacturing and energy. The first functional solar power satellite beamed energy to Moscow in 1999. The United States, once the leader of the free world, was now a distant second in the high ground of space. The Cold War didn't end. It froze, with a new, unbreachable status quo. The world lived under the shadow of a Soviet-dominated sky, a constant, silent reminder of what might have been. Today, in 2024, we live in that world's long shadow. The night sky is different. You can see the Soviet lunar base, Zvezda, as a steady, moving pinprick of light. The International Space Station was never built. Instead, there is the Mir 2, a sprawling complex where Russian and Chinese taikonauts work, with the occasional European or Indian guest. American astronauts are rarely invited, and when they are, it's a political gesture, a charity. NASA's budget is a fraction of what it once was. We talk not of Mars, but of maybe one day returning to the moon as a junior partner in an international consortium led by others. The what if is the ghost that haunts our national psyche. What if that valve hadn't failed? What if Lovell, Haise, and Swigert had splashed down safely in the Pacific? We would have had Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17. A permanent lunar base by the 1980s. A manned mission to Mars in the 1990s. The technological world we live in would be decades more advanced. We would be a multi-planetary species. The optimism of the 1960s would have carried forward, instead of being snuffed out in a moment of silent, terrible re-entry. The loss of Apollo 13 taught us the wrong lesson. It taught us that space was too hard, too dangerous, too costly. It taught us to fear the stars. It made us small. We chose to cling to our planet, to play it safe, to look inward. And in doing so, we surrendered the future. We look up at the moon now not with wonder but with a quiet, shameful regret. It is a monument to human courage, yes, but it is also a gravestone for the future that never was. The silence from Apollo 13 never ended. We just learned to live with it, a permanent static in the background of our ambition, a constant reminder of the day we turned our backs on the cosmos.